There's really not much else to focus on for the Lake Show these days as you take a look at that playoff picture in the Western Conference. They are near the bottom of the Western Conference standing, not even on the board there, kind of on the right. In the hunt, you'd say, 24 wins, tied with Oklahoma City at this point after a nice little run to start the year. The Lakers have dropped 3 of their last 5 games. But they are coming off an overtime win over the Knicks. So let's welcome in CBS Sports NBA writer Bill Reiter for more on this and talk a little bit about the trade deadline. William, we're watching LeBron. We're also eyeing up the deadline, which is a week away. For the Lakers at this point, selling or are they more buying?
Jeremy, it sounds like, so there's been an internal debate and some internal struggle on whether they should move one or both of their valuable picks. It's the 2027 and 2029 first-round picks to get some help or just stand pat. We know LeBron James wants help. He's made that fairly clear, even if it's been fairly passive-aggressive. And just talking to sources over the last few hours, it sounds like from folks within and outside of that Lakers organization, the Lakers are working very hard to make a move. They want to add help at the deadline. You noted where they are in the Western Conference standings, but they're within striking distance of the play-in. They're really within striking distance of that 6th spot. It's a very crowded Western Conference. Right now, as I'm hearing it, they prefer to trade one of those picks. So that might be a Bojan Bogdanovic from Detroit, although they don't have a deal in place yet because Detroit doesn't want any protections. But if the Lakers are willing, they're not yet, if they're willing to move, as I understand it, both of those first-round picks from 27 and 29, the Raptors might be a team where they could target and get someone like OG Anunoby, who's obviously a young star. You might be able to get Gary Trent Jr. and Fred VanVleet for both of those picks and other pieces. The Lakers haven't been willing to move both of them yet, but I'm told there have been conversations between LA and the Raptors in anticipation of the possibility of a deal if the Lakers decide to get really aggressive at the deadline.
Raptors have lost 3 of their last 4. They sit 7 games below 500. So in terms of the Raptors at the deadline, I mean, what kind of suitors are there besides the Lakers for the Raptors and some of their key pieces?
Everybody. I mean, it is almost the entire NBA that is sizing up Toronto like this fattened cow that is ready for the slaughter because, and I think we've talked about this here on the show, Jeremy, the way the plan works now is that there's so many teams that are crowded together that can at least pretend that they're in the mix with their owners for job security, that you don't have sellers that emerge to the very last second. And you said it, the Raptors are one of those teams. I was told by folks all over the NBA, GMs over the last few weeks, along with the Bulls and the Hawks, how they did down the stretch leading up to next week's trade deadline would dictate if they were buyers or sellers. He noted it hasn't gone well. They're probably going to be sellers. Anunoby's a guy that can be traded. Fred VanVleet's a guy that can be traded. I mean, you're talking about Gary Trent Jr.'s a guy that can be traded. Scotty Barnes, maybe. And even Pascal Siakam, who most people I've talked to think the Raptors will hold on to if they rebuild and build around. But there's some folks, some sources who think, hell, maybe they'll just blow up the entire thing if they can get the right price. So every single team that wants to be active at this trade deadline is waiting for Toronto to make the decision they're going to be sellers. And when that happens, you could have bidding wars for a lot of those players. I'm told that Memphis and Golden State are both really, really interested in OG Anunoby, and there could be a bidding war for him between those two contenders. So I think things get really interesting, Jeremy, and if what I'm hearing is accurate, Toronto could be one of the primary teams that are sending really impactful players to contenders and would-be contenders over the next week.
Let's talk about another one of those teams that could be looking to make some moves. Atlanta sitting in 8th spot in the East at the 500 mark. John Collins and Trae Young are names that we keep hearing about. What about the Hawks' plans at this point, Bill?
Yeah, I've talked to several sources within that organization and then obviously Eastern Conference and Western Conference folks who are familiar with the Hawks, and they're a hot mess. I mean, that is the summation from inside and outside the Hawks. I know that they'd like to move on from John Collins. Now, that's been true. That's like saying water is wet or the sun is bright. That's been true for a long time now. But as I understand it, they're willing to lower their asking price just to move on from John Collins. He does not get along with Trae Young. The Hawks, it sounds like, talking to folks, want to hang on to Trae Young at this trade deadline, want him to be here, but there is a concern from the folks in Atlanta and really a sense from the people outside of Atlanta that if things do not go well for the Hawks between now and the deadline, and really between now and the end of the season, whenever that comes for Atlanta, Trae Young might be the guy that asked to be moved out of Atlanta in the summertime. He's not popular in that locker room. It's not going well, but he is talented, so that's certainly someone to keep an eye on over the next week and certainly the next few months.
This entire season, you talk about players that, teams want to necessarily move away from. It's been a waiting game this entire season for disgruntled Suns forward Jay Crowder. There are reports the Bucks may be interested in acquiring him. What is the appetite for Crowder as the deadline approaches?
Yeah, I've heard the same thing. I was told yesterday or the day before, it all kind of bleeds together, Jeremy, that Milwaukee would love to bring in Jay Crowder when he plays, right? When he's willing to play basketball, we know what the guy is. He's a great defensive player. He can shoot the rock. He's been through the wars. He knows how to win in the postseason. And Milwaukee certainly has the sense that they have a clear championship window. We know this. And they just haven't played at the level they want. They've had some injuries, but they're not where they want to be. And talking to folks in that organization, there's a slight concern. I don't want to overstate it, but they've noticed how well Boston has played, and Boston's gone to this other level. And Milwaukee is worried maybe they don't have quite the firepower. They're going to try to get a deal done with the Suns. There's just the issue and the concern that the Suns are in a weird transitional period with their front office waiting for this ownership change. What's going to happen to Chris Paul? The Suns aren't playing very well, and that sounds like it's made it really difficult for Phoenix to know how they want to approach a situation where, on the one hand, you got to get something for Jay Crowder. On the other hand, I can tell you they are very frustrated the way he has conducted himself over the course of this season.
Well, it's one of those key storylines to watch as we head towards the deadline. Lastly, Bill, what about the Bulls? I mean, they're in limbo, 4-6 in their last 10. What's happening in Chicago?
Yeah, so it sounds like of those three teams we've talked about over the last few weeks, Toronto's going to be a seller. It sounds like Atlanta's going to be a mild buyer. They're certainly not going to redo the entire thing other than John Collins. The Bulls are a team that folks I talk to, at least, Jeremy, are still waiting to make up their mind. I think Chicago still doesn't know, are they buying, are they selling? If they decide to go into the sell mode, you've got guys like DeMar DeRozan and Zach LaVine. If you moved one or both, would get a huge return. It could certainly spur a rebuild. But I know in Chicago, maybe they're being overly optimistic. They still think there's a chance that they can figure it out, the chemistry of those two guys, maybe add the right pieces, maybe they can be competitive again. So I think the next few days and how they play between now and the deadline next week will determine which side of the coin in terms of the trade deadline the Bulls are on.
Sitting at 23-27, 5 games back of the Miami Heat for 6th place in the Eastern Conference. CBS Sports NBA writer Bill Reiter discussing some NBA trade deadline storylines as we get set for action next week. Thanks very much, Bill. 7 games tonight on the hardwood. LeBron, of course, chasing history, 89 points away from passing Kareem. My desk pod mate Paul Pfeiffer says LeBron goes for 90 tonight, but he's questionable. Grizzlies, Cavs meet for the final time this season. These are the NBA's 2 best defensive teams, so smash that under. And 2 teams on good runs meet in the Cream City. Clippers 6-1 in their last 7 as they face the Bucks, who've won 5 straight.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis. No yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.